I'm Anya, 29, a woman, and I'm a financial analyst. That last part is important because my professional life is about numbers making sense. It's about assets and liabilities, profits and losses, and the cold, hard data that tells a story. For the last decade, however, my personal life has been about numbers that make no sense at all, a story of endless liabilities and emotional losses, all for the sake of my family. And that story reached its unbelievable climax at what was supposed to be a festive Christmas dinner, when my family tried to trick me into paying $48,000 for my brother's wedding. The scene was so perfectly, deceptively normal. The scent of pine from the Christmas tree mingled with the rich aroma of my mother's roast beef. Bing Crosby was crooning about a white Christmas from a small speaker in the corner. My mother, Susan, was fluttering around the dining table, her face a mask of determined cheerfulness, while my father, Robert, sat at the head of the table, looking proud and kingly in his holiday sweater. Across from me, my younger brother, Caleb, was practically glowing, his arm draped around his fiancée, Mia, who smiled, oblivious and happy. For me, these family gatherings had long ceased to be about warmth and cheer. They were strategic operations. I had learned to navigate the emotional minefield, to smile through the subtle digs, to deflect the inevitable requests for money that were always disguised as something else. I loved my family, but I was beginning to understand that their love for me felt conditional, tied directly to the balance in my bank account. Everyone, can I have your attention?" Caleb said, tapping his water glass with a fork. He had the same charming, easy smile he'd had since he was a boy, a smile that had gotten him out of trouble 1,000 times. Mia beamed at his side, her eyes sparkling with adoration. "We have some wonderful news," Caleb continued, his voice full of manufactured gravitas. "As you know, Mia and I have been searching for the perfect wedding venue, and we found it. It's called the Willows, and it's a dream." My mother clasped her hands together. "Oh, Caleb, that's wonderful." "It is," he said, his eyes finally landing on me. There was a predatory gleam in them that I knew all too well. "It's also, as you can imagine, quite expensive. The deposit alone is significant, but we don't have to worry about that." He paused for dramatic effect. "Because my dear, wonderful, and incredibly successful sister, Anya, has graciously offered to cover the entire venue fee as her wedding gift to us." The room erupted. My mother gasped with delight. My father's chest puffed out with pride. Mia turned to me, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Anya, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say. Thank you. A $48,000 gift, that's everything." I just sat there, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, the piece of roast beef suddenly feeling like a stone. The air was sucked out of my lungs. $48,000. He said it so casually as if he were announcing I'd agreed to bring a side dish. I looked around the table. Their smiling faces, their utter lack of shock, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a surprise announcement for them. It was only a surprise to me, the one who was expected to pay. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I felt 100 pairs of imaginary eyes on me, all from ghosts of Christmases past. This was the culmination of years of this exact dynamic, just on a scale I could never have imagined. I thought back to 3 years ago when Caleb had called me sobbing. He'd wrapped his new sports car, a car I knew he couldn't afford, around a telephone pole. "Dad is going to kill me, Anya," he'd wept into the phone. "The insurance won't cover all of it. The repairs are thousands of dollars. I'll be ruined." My father got on the phone next. His voice was firm, laced with disappointment directed somehow at me. "Anya, this is a family emergency. He's your brother. We have to help him. You're the only one who is in a position to do so." It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. I was in a position because I had worked tirelessly since I was 16. I had scholarships, I worked 2 jobs through college, I climbed the ladder at a competitive firm. Caleb had worked part-time at a surf shop. Yet his emergency was my responsibility. I paid the $7,000 repair bill. Caleb thanked me with a casual, "You're a lifesaver, sis," and I never heard about it again. It wasn't a loan. It was just absorbed into the family's unwritten constitution. Anya pays. Then there was the loan for his apartment 2 years ago. He was moving in with some friends and was short on the security deposit and first month's rent. "I'll pay you back as soon as I get my first paycheck, I swear," he had promised, looking me earnestly in the eye. I knew it was a lie, but the pressure from my parents was immense. "He's trying to be resp. Ansible Anya," my mother had said. "Don't discourage him, it's just a loan to help him get on his feet." I transferred him the $3,500. A year later, when I gently brought it up, my father scoffed. "For heaven's sake, Anya, are you keeping a tally on your own family? He's your brother, that's what family is for." The conversation was over. And the dinners, oh the dinners, it became a running joke among my friends. At least twice a month my mother would call. "Let us have a family dinner, just the four of us. My treat, of course," she'd say, knowing full well she'd forget her wallet. By the time the dinner happened, Caleb would have invited Mia and 2 or 3 of their friends. "They were in the neighborhood," he'd say with a shrug. He would then proceed to order appetizers for the table, the most expensive bottle of wine, and the surf and turf, while I would watch, my stomach churning with anxiety. When the bill came, all eyes would turn to me. My father would give a little cough and say, "Anya, you've got this, right? We'll get you back." They never did. 8 major dinners in the last year alone, each one a bill of several $100s, all paid by me. Back at the Christmas table, the silence stretched. Mia was still looking at me, her expression of pure joy slowly starting to curdle into confusion at my lack of response. I had to say something. "Caleb," I started, my voice barely a whisper. We didn't discuss this." My father cleared his throat, a warning sound I had known my entire life. "Now, Anya, don't be modest. Caleb told us all about your generous spirit." "It's not about being modest," I said, finding a sliver of strength. "A $48,000 gift is something that would require a conversation. A very serious one." Caleb laughed, a hollow, dismissive sound. "Oh, come on, sis, don't be like that, it's Christmas. For what you make, it's a drop in the bucket. Don't ruin the moment." Ruin the moment. My moment had been ruined the second he opened his mouth. I felt sick. I needed to get out of there. Pushing my chair back, I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. "Excuse me," I mumbled, turning and walking away from the table, ignoring my mother's worried call of my name. I headed down the hallway toward the guest bathroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. I just needed a quiet space to breathe, to stop the room from spinning. The bathroom door was closed. I could hear the fan whirring. I leaned against the wall in the dim hallway, closing my eyes. And that's when I heard it. A whisper, sharp and conspiratorial, from the living room just around the corner. It was my father's voice, low and urgent. "She looks upset," Caleb said, his voice a petulant whine. "I think you pushed it too far." Then my father's voice, the words that would echo in my mind for the rest of my life. "Do not worry," he whispered. "She'll come around. She just needs to be dramatic first. If she refuses, we'll make her see sense. We'll make your sister pay." A cold clarity washed over me, so potent it felt like ice water flooding my veins. It wasn't just entitlement. It wasn't just assumption. It was a plan. They had discussed this. They had a strategy. "We'll make your sister pay." They were going to corner me, guilt me, manipulate me, and break me down until I surrendered my hard-earned money for his dream wedding. I stood completely still, listening to my own breathing. The shock was gone, replaced by something new, a strange, quiet calm. I felt a switch flip inside my soul. The part of me that always gave in, that always tried to keep the peace, went silent. I pushed myself off the wall and turned, not back towards the dining room, but toward the front door. As I passed the entryway to the living room, I saw them huddled together, my father with a hand on Caleb's shoulder. They didn't see me. I walked out of the house without my coat, the frigid December air hitting my face like a slap. It felt good. It felt real. In the quiet of my car, as I pulled away from the curb, leaving the warm glow of the house behind, I whispered 2 words to the empty passenger seat. "Copy that." The war had been declared, and for the first time in my life, I was going to fight back. The drive home was a blur of red taillights and blurred Christmas decorations. The festive cheer that adorned every house on my street seemed to mock me, a stark contrast to the glacial fury solidifying in my chest. For years, I had navigated my family's dysfunction with a sense of weary resignation. I'd told myself it was easier to just give in, to pay the bill, to be the responsible one, because the fight wasn't worth the emotional cost. I now realized that my silence had been misinterpreted as consent. My generosity had been rebranded as an obligation. The conversation I'd overheard wasn't just about the $48,000. It was the key that unlocked the truth of the past decade. Every emergency, every loan, every favor, they weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a long-term, unspoken family policy. Caleb was the golden child, the one whose dreams must be funded at all costs. I was the family utility, the infrastructure that made it all possible. And our father was the CEO of this toxic little enterprise, whispering assurances that he would make the sister pay. When I got home, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked through the silent apartment, the rage inside me a low, humming frequency. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was cold and methodical. It was the anger of a financial analyst who had just discovered a massive, fraudulent account draining the company's resources. My family was the company. I was the resource. I bypassed my bedroom and went straight to my home office. I sat down in the dark, the city lights painting patterns on the wall, and I let the full weight of the betrayal settle over me. It was the betrayal from Caleb that stung, but it was the one from my father that truly broke something inside me. He was supposed to be my protector, my advocate. Instead, he was the one holding me down so my brother could pick my pockets. That's when I whispered it again, this time to the empty room, a promise to myself. Copy that. It was a military term, an acknowledgement of an order received. In this case, the order was a declaration of war. My compliance was over. My role as the family ATM was officially terminated. I opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my face in the dark room. My fingers, usually busy building complex financial models for multi-million-dollar clients, found a new purpose. I opened a new spreadsheet. It was clean, white, and beautifully logical. A blank slate waiting for the truth. The title I typed into cell A1 wasn't emotional. It was simple. Caleb, Outstanding DBTS and UNRIMBURCD GIFTS. Then I began to dig. My profession had made me meticulous, almost pathologically organized. I had years of digital bank statements, credit card histories, and archived emails. I started with the most recent offenses and worked my way backward. The first category was unreimbursed group expenses. I started with the dinners. I found the credit card statement for that steakhouse 2 weeks ago. Item, dinner at Morton's Caleb Mia plus 2 friends. Amount, $487.50. I entered it. Then the Italian place the month before. Item, dinner at Carbone's Caleb Mia plus 3 friends. Amount, $612. I went back a full 2 years. 8 major dinners. The total was staggering. Next, I created a new category. Cash transfers, loans, non-repaid. This was the painful one. I scrolled through years of my banking history. My finger hovered over the transfer from 2 years ago. To Caleb, memo, apartment deposit. Amount, $3,500. I typed it into the spreadsheet. Below it, I added a note. Status, unpaid. Verbal repayment promise unfulfilled. I found another one from 4 years ago for a car down payment. Amount, $5,000. He had promised that one was a real investment in his future. I added it to the list. Then another, for a laptop he needed for a graphic design course he never finished. Amount, $2,200. $3 major loans, all dismissed by my parents as what family is for. The final category was the most extensive and the most heartbreaking: gifts and ad hoc financial support. This was the gray area, the zone of manipulation and guilt. I started with the big one. Item, vehicle collision repair. Amount, $7,000. As I typed the words, I remembered the panic in his voice and the steel in my father's. I felt a fresh wave of anger at how easily they had played me. I kept digging. There were the concert tickets for him and Mia that I was guilted into buying because I could afford better seats. Item, 2x front row tickets, The Killers, amount, $850. There were the 4 times I had covered his cell phone bill when it was about to be shut off. The ski trip lift passes. The designer jacket he had to have for a New Year's party. Each transaction was a small cut, a minor bleed that I had barely noticed at the time. But now, laid out in neat little rows on a spreadsheet, they were not small. They were a pattern of systemic exploitation. 48 distinct gifts and bailouts I could document over 5 years. Each one had a story, an excuse, a layer of emotional manipulation that I had absorbed without complaint. Hours passed. The sky outside began to lighten from black to a deep indigo. I didn't feel tired. I felt energized, purged. The spreadsheet was a monument to my own silence. It was a testament to every time I had swallowed my pride, every time I had said it's fine when it wasn't fine at all. As the sun began to rise, I leaned back in my chair and looked at the final tally at the bottom of the spreadsheet. I had started this exercise out of anger, but the professional in me had taken over. This was no longer just a list of grievances. It was data, and the data told a story. The total came to $56,250. It was more than the cost of the wedding venue. It was a sum that represented a significant portion of my savings, the money I had diligently put away for my own future, my own dreams. Seeing that number, glowing in a bold font, wasn't satisfying. It was sickening, but it was also liberating. It was the truth, quantified and undeniable. The decision of what to do next was already made. The whispers in the hallway had sealed their fate. They wanted to make me pay. Fine, I would send them the bill. With the sun now streaming through my office window, I moved into the final phase of my operation. A simple spreadsheet, emailed in anger, would be too easy for them to dismiss. My father would call it petty, Caleb would call it a joke. No, this response had to be as serious and methodical as the analysis that preceded it. It had to be cold, professional, and utterly irrefutable. It had to be an invoice. Using my firm's software, I opened a professional invoice template. In the top left corner, I entered my name and address under the heading Creditor. In the top right, under Debtor, I typed Caleb last name. I left the address blank. He knew where I lived. The invoice date was today's date. Payment due, net 30. Then I began to transfer the data from my spreadsheet. I didn't use emotional language. I used the detached, formal terminology of a business transaction. The unreimbursed group expenses became line item 1, reimbursement for hosted group dinners. I listed each dinner by date, restaurant, and amount, referencing the credit card statements. The cash transfers became line item 2, principal on unsecured personal loans. I listed the date and original purpose for each transfer, the apartment deposit, the car down payment, the laptop. I added a subnote. As per verbal agreements, these loans are now considered called and due in full. The final, longest section was the most powerful. The gifts and ad hoc financial support became line item 3, retrospective invoicing for goods and services rendered. This is where I listed the car repair, the concert tickets, the phone bills, the plane ticket for his spontaneous trip to visit a friend. Each of the 48 items was listed, a clinical accounting of a one-sided relationship. I didn't add interest. I didn't add late fees. The raw, unadorned total at the bottom was statement enough, $56,250. The final, crucial touch was the title. I didn't want invoice or demand for payment. I needed something that would land with the perfect, chilling blend of politeness and malice. I thought about Caleb's smug announcement at the dinner table, the way he had framed his demand as a celebration. And I found the perfect word. At the top of the document, in large, bold letters, I typed a single word: congratulations. I saved the file as a PDF. Congratulations, PDF. It was a work of art. It was a declaration of independence. It was the receipt for a decade of my life. My finger hovered over the mouse, the PDF attached to a new, blank email. The recipient was Caleb Atimil, com. I did CC my parents. This was for Caleb. He was the one who made the announcement. He was the one who would receive the response. Let him be the one to explain it to our father. The subject line of the email was the same as the invoice title. Congratulations. No text in the body. The attachment would speak for itself. I clicked send. The little whoosh sound from my laptop speakers echoed in the silent apartment. It was done. A decade of resentment, of being undervalued and overdrawn, had been condensed into a single PDF and fired off into the digital ether. I felt a profound sense of relief, followed immediately by a wave of gut-wrenching anxiety. There was no going back. The carefully constructed, dysfunctional piece of my family was about to be shattered, and I was holding the hammer. Then the silence began. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I expected an immediate, explosive phone call. I braced myself for a barrage of furious texts from Caleb, from my father, maybe even a tearful, pleading message from my mother. Nothing. The first 24 hours were the worst. Every buzz of my phone made my heart leap into my throat, but it was just work emails or a notification from a friend. The silence was deafening. It was a strategic silence, I realized. They were likely huddled together, trying to formulate a response, to figure out how to spin this, how to regain control. My father would be advising Caleb to ignore it, to treat it as a hysterical outburst that would eventually fade. 2 days passed, then 3. The silence stretched, becoming more unnerving with each passing hour. I started to second-guess myself. Had I gone too far? Had I misread the situation? Was it possible they were just going to ignore it completely, pretend it never happened, and still expect me to show up with a check for $48,000? On the 4th day, I received a text from my mother. It was exactly the kind of passive G-aggressive missile I had anticipated. Hi, sweetie, just checking in. Everything felt so tense after Christmas dinner. I hope you're not still upset about Caleb's little joke. He gets carried away sometimes. We love you. Little joke. They were testing the waters. They were trying to reframe reality, to gaslight me into believing that a public demand for a 5-figure sum was a harmless jest. I stared at the message for a long time. My old self, the Anya of last week, would have replied immediately. She would have apologized for being upset. She would have smoothed things over. She would have let the joke stand, because it was easier than confronting the truth. The new Anya, the Anya who had spent a night cataloging her own exploitation, did something different. She did nothing. I didn't reply. I put my phone down and let the message sit there unanswered. My silence was my new answer. My silence was a boundary. The week that followed was one of the loneliest of my life. The digital void from my family felt like a physical presence. The silence wasn't just a lack of communication, it was a punishment. They were shunning me, waiting for me to break, for me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness for the crime of standing up for myself. But I did not break. I worked. I met a friend for dinner. I went to the gym. I lived my life, and I waited. I knew the silence couldn't last forever. The invoice was a ticking time bomb, and the timer was about to run out. I just had no idea who would be holding it when it finally went off. It happened exactly 1 week after I sent the email. I was at my desk, reviewing quarterly earnings reports when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, not saved in my contacts. My stomach did a familiar flip-flop. This was it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself from my father's rage or my brother's venom, and answered. "Hello," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. A woman's voice, hesitant and trembling slightly, came through the speaker. "Anya, it's Mia." Of all the people I expected to hear from, Mia was last on the list. I was so prepared for an attack that her tentative tone caught me completely off guard. "Mia," I said, my mind racing, "is everything okay?" There was a pause, and then she took a shaky breath. I don't know, I'm hoping you can tell me." Her voice was quiet, strained. "Caleb is acting really strange. He's been angry and secretive all week. His dad is furious. They keep having these whispered conversations, and And today, Caleb left his email open on the laptop. I saw something, an email from you. My blood ran cold. It was just one word in the subject line, she continued, her voice cracking. It said congratulations. And there was a PDF attached. I opened it, Anya. I shouldn't have, but I did. I saw the invoice. I remained silent, letting her speak. At first, I didn't understand. I thought it was a mistake or some kind of weird, aggressive joke. But I read the line items, the dinners. I was there for those dinners. I remember you paying. The loan for the apartment deposit. He told me his parents gifted him that money. The car repair. He told me it was fully covered by insurance. She stopped and I could hear her trying to compose herself. The call wasn't an attack. It was a fact-finding mission, and she sounded heartbroken. Anya, she finally whispered, and the sound was so full of desperate confusion that it pierced through my anger. I have to ask you, I know this is awful, but I have to know, is this real? This was the moment of truth, the point where I could either burn everything to the ground or be surgical. I thought about Mia, so happy and radiant at the Christmas dinner. I had seen her as part of the problem, an accomplice in my brother's scheme. But listening to her now, I realized she was just another person who had been taken in by Caleb's charm and my family's elaborate performance. She was potentially as much a victim as I was. I leaned back in my chair and made a decision. I would not be emotional, I would not be accusatory. I would simply be the financial analyst. I would present the data. Yes, Mia, I said, my voice calm and even. It's all real. Every line item on that invoice corresponds to a real transaction that I can verify with bank and credit card statements. But why, she asked, her voice pleading. Why would you send this now, to do this over the wedding? It feels so cruel. The timing wasn't my choice, I explained, keeping my tone level. At Christmas dinner, Caleb announced to everyone, including you, that I would be gifting you both $48,000 for the wedding venue. That was the first I had ever heard of it. He and my father made that decision without my consent and expected me to just fall in line. I heard a sharp intake of breath on her end. I overheard my father promise Caleb that he would make me pay if I refused, I continued. The invoice wasn't the fee. RST shot Mia. It was the answer. It was my way of stating, for the record, that my financial support is not an entitlement, and I wanted to provide a clear accounting of why I would not be making any further contributions to my brother's lifestyle. The line was silent for a long time. I could picture her on the other end, sitting with my brother's laptop, the glowing screen of the invoice open, cross-referencing my words with the lies she had been told. The happy, simple future she had imagined was being systematically dismantled by a PDF. $56,000, she said finally, her voice hollow. He let you pay over $56,000, and he never told me. He told me you were just very generous because you had so much money. My financial situation, I said firmly, is the result of my career and my discipline. It's not a family slush fund. For a long time, I allowed it to be treated that way to keep the peace. I'm not willing to do that anymore. I could hear the sound of a muffled sob. Our whole financial plan for the wedding. He told me he had savings. He showed me a bank statement. A horrifying thought dawned on me. Oh my God, she whispered. That money, the money he saved, was it the loan from you for the car down payment? I didn't have to answer. The silence was my confirmation. I have to go, she said abruptly. Her voice was no longer sad, it was brittle, cold, the sound of disillusionment. Thank you for being honest with me, Anya. I need to think. The line went dead. I put my phone down on the desk, my hand trembling slightly. The conversation had been more draining than 100 arguments with my father. I felt a pang of genuine sympathy for Mia. She was about to have the worst conversation of her life, a conversation that would force her to reevaluate the man she had promised to marry. The invoice had been a targeted missile, aimed squarely at my brother and my father. I had never intended for Mia to be the primary casualty, but as I sat there, replaying her words, I realized the truth didn't care about collateral damage. It simply was. And for the first time, someone outside my family's toxic bubble had seen it. The time bomb had gone off, and the fallout was only just beginning. The Monday after my call with Mia felt like the beginning of a new era. The initial shockwave had hit, and now I was waiting for the aftershocks. They came, as I expected, not with a phone call, but through the cold, impersonal lens of social media. A friend from college sent me a screenshot just before lunch. It was a post from the official Instagram page of the Willows, the dream wedding venue. The picture was a stunning shot of the venue at sunset, all fairy lights and rustic charm. The caption, however, was what made my heart stop. A little bit of booking magic. Due to a last-minute cancellation, we now have a prime Saturday available this coming September. Our loss is your gain. DM us for details on this highly sought-after date. Wedding venue dream wedding date available # cancelled. They had tagged Caleb's public profile. So it was done. The deposit hadn't been paid. The dream was dead. Staring at the cheerful, opportunistic post, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. This was the inevitable consequence of their actions, a direct result of a wedding funded by lies. Yet, seeing it so publicly displayed felt brutal. I didn't have long to process it. My phone began to vibrate, the screen flashing with the one name I had been dreading. Dad, the storm had arrived. I let it ring, my hand hovering over the screen. I needed to prepare myself. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and took a long, slow sip. When he called back a second time, I answered, putting the phone on speaker and placing it on the counter. Anya, he boomed, his voice distorted with a rage I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. He didn't bother with a greeting. What did you do? Hello, Dad, I said, my voice a placid lake in the face of his hurricane. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't you play coy with me, the venue, they cancelled the booking. Caleb is devastated. Mia is a mess, you have ruined your brother's wedding. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? His accusations rained down on me, each one designed to trigger the guilt and shame that had been his primary weapons for my entire life. But the weapons weren't working anymore. I had spent a week staring at the invoice, at the raw data of his favoritism. I was inoculated. I didn't do anything, Dad, I replied calmly. The venue cancelled because they weren't paid. That's how businesses operate. Services are rendered in exchange for payment. No payment, no services. Payment, he scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. That was your payment, your gift, the one you agreed to. No, I said, my voice hardening. That was the gift you and Caleb decided I would be jivvy. NG, I was never consulted. My role was simply to provide the funds. I have opted out of that role. Opted out? This is a family, not a business contract, he roared. You are selfish, Anya, you always have been. You have all this money, and you can't find it in your heart to help your own brother have a happy life. You're cruel. I took a breath. This was it, the final confrontation. Let's talk about being cruel, Dad, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. Is it cruel to expect to be asked before being volunteered for a $48,000 expense? Is it selfish to want to be seen as a daughter instead of a line of credit? I was in the hallway on Christmas night, Dad. I heard you. I heard you promise Caleb you would make me pay. Your exact words. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with shock. He hadn't known I'd heard. He had assumed his conspiracy was safe. You're taking that out of context, he stammered, his rage momentarily deflating. There is no context in which those words are acceptable from a father to a daughter, I shot back. You weren't going to ask me. You weren't going to reason with me. You were going to make me. You showed me exactly how you see me, Dad. You see me as a problem to be managed, an obstacle to your plans for Caleb. Well, management lesson number 1. The assets are now frozen. He was sputtering, trying to regain his footing, but I wasn't finished. For my entire adult life, you have enabled him and you have exploited me. Every time he was irresponsible, I was called upon to be responsible. Every time he made a mistake, I was expected to fix it. and all you did was stand there and tell me it was my duty. I am done with that duty. The bank is closed." He said my name, his voice low and threatening, but I cut him off. "This conversation is over," I said, and I hung up. My body was shaking. My hands trembled as I picked up the glass of water. I had never spoken to my father like that before. It was terrifying and, in a strange way, exhilarating. The phone rang again almost immediately. This time it was my mother. I knew what this call would be. This was the cleanup crew, the emotional appeal. I answered. "Anya, honey," she began, her voice thick with tears. "Your father is so upset. You need to call him back and apologize." "Apologize for what, Mom?" I asked, my exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. "For everything, for this whole mess. You've torn this family apart. Caleb is locked in his room, Mia left hours ago, and your father, I've never seen him like this. All over money. Is it really worth all this pain? Can't you just be the bigger person and fix this?" Be the bigger person. The 4 words that had defined my existence. Be the bigger person and pay for the dinner. Be the bigger person and forgive the loan. Be the bigger person and swallow your feelings. Be the bigger person and let them walk all over you, because our family's peace is fragile, and it is your job to maintain it. "Mom," I said, and my voice broke, the emotion I'd been suppressing finally bubbling to the surface. "I have been the bigger person my entire life. I have been so big that I have no room left for myself. My job is not to fix the mess that Dad and Caleb made. My job is to protect myself from it. And that's what I'm doing. I'm sorry that it's painful for you, but the peace you're asking for always comes at my expense. And I can't afford it anymore." I could hear her quiet sobbing. It hurt to hear her cry, but it was a distant pain now, not the immediate, gut-wrenching pain it used to be. It was the pain of a necessary surgery, the severing of a limb that had become toxic. "I have to go, Mom," I said gently. "I love you." I ended the call before she could reply. I slid down to the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, and finally let myself cry. I wept for the family I wished I had, for the father I deserved, for the brother I loved but could no longer enable. And I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who would have already transferred the money, just to make the yelling stop. I mourned her, but I did not miss her. She was gone. And I had to figure out who was going to take her place. The days following the phone calls were a study in silence. The angry calls stopped. The pleading texts ceased. It was a cold, heavy quiet, the kind that follows a catastrophic storm. I knew, however, that the battle wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more insidious phase. In the vacuum of our communication, I was sure my father and brother were constructing a new narrative, one where I was the unstable, jealous, vindictive villain who had sabotaged Caleb's happiness out of pure spite. They would be telling this story to relatives, to family friends, and most importantly, to Mia and her family. They would try to salvage the relationship by painting me as a liar. The invoice, without context, could be twisted to look like a document born of lies. My meticulously gathered data could be dismissed as the ravings of a crazy sister. I couldn't let that happen. Mia deserved the full, unvarnished truth, anchored by proof. And more importantly, her family deserved to know the full financial and ethical character of the man their daughter was planning to marry. This was no longer about revenge. My anger had cooled and settled into a grim resolve. This was about setting the record straight. It was a final, necessary act of self-defense. On Thursday, I went to a high-end stationery store. I didn't buy a regular manila envelope. I bought a pack of large, A4-sized envelopes made of thick, black cardstock. They were sleek, serious, and somber. They felt appropriate for the news they were about to deliver. That evening, I assembled the package. This wasn't a bundle of angry printouts. It was a formal portfolio of evidence. I had learned from my father that presentation is everything. I was now using that lesson against him. First, I drafted a letter. My tone was respectful and regretful. I addressed it to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Mia's parents, whose names I had found on Mia's social media. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, my name is Anya, last name, and I am Caleb's sister. I am writing to you under what I know are extremely difficult and unusual circumstances. It is with the deepest regret that I feel compelled to send this letter, but I believe you have a right to be fully informed about a situation that directly impacts your daughter, Mia. I have been made aware that the cancellation of Caleb and Mia's wedding venue has caused significant distress. I have also been made aware that the narrative being constructed around this event places the blame on me. For that reason, I feel it is my ethical responsibility to provide you with the factual context that has been deliberately omitted. For many years, I have served as the primary and often sole source of financial support for my brother. This support has gone far beyond typical sibling generosity, and it was a pattern enabled and encouraged by our father. The recent expectation that I would single-handedly fund their $48,000 wedding venue was the culmination of this long-standing dynamic. My refusal to do so, and the subsequent fallout, is not an act of malice. It is an act of self-preservation. Enclosed, you will find two documents for your review. The first is a professional invoice detailing over $56,000 in unreimbursed expenses, non-repaid loans, and other financial support that I have provided to Caleb over the past 5 years. The second is a collection of redacted bank and credit card statements to corroborate the major transactions listed on that invoice. I am not sending this to you to demand payment or to sow discord. I am sending it because you deserve the truth. I believe that marriage is a partnership, and partnerships are built on trust and transparency, especially in financial matters. I am truly sorry for the pain this situation has caused Mia. She is a kind and wonderful person who does not deserve to be caught in the middle of my family's dysfunction. Sincerely, Anya, last name. I proofread the letter 3 times, ensuring it was devoid of anger or hyperbole. It was calm, factual, and sad. Next, I printed a fresh, pristine copy of the congratulations PDF. I had it professionally bound at a copy shop, so it looked like a formal report. Behind it, I placed the copies of my statements. I had used a black marker to redact my account numbers and any personal transactions, but the transfers to Caleb, the dinner charges, and the payment to the auto body shop were all clearly visible, highlighted in yellow. I slipped the letter, the bound invoice, and the statements into the heavy black envelope. It felt substantial in my hands, a physical manifestation of a decade of resentment. I sealed it carefully. The next morning, I didn't just put it in the mail. I took it to a professional courier service. I paid for tracked, next-day delivery that required a signature upon receipt. This was not a piece of mail that could get lost. Its arrival would be a documented event. As I handed the black envelope to the clerk, I felt no thrill of victory. There was no joy in this, only a profound and heavy sadness. This was the final, irrevocable act. This was the burning of the bridge. I was severing a tie not just with my brother, but with the entire family structure I had ever known. I walked out of the courier's office into the bright morning sun. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger or sadness. It was a sense of quiet. The internal battle was over. I had gathered the facts, I had presented my case, and I had delivered the evidence. The outcome was now out of my hands. Whatever happened next, whatever story they tried to tell, the truth was now anchored in the real world, sitting in a black envelope on its way to Mia's parents. I had done everything I could do. I was finally completely done. The delivery confirmation email arrived in my inbox the next day at 10:15 a.m. Your package has been delivered and signed for by M. Thompson. The black envelope had reached its destination. I closed my laptop and braced for the final explosion. But it never came. Unlike the week after I sent the invoice to Caleb, this silence was different. It wasn't the tense, strategic silence of people plotting their next move. It was the vast, empty silence of a finished story. There were no more angry calls from my father, no more pleading texts from my mother. There was nothing. It was as if the branch of the family tree that I occupied had been cleanly and quietly sawed off. I didn't hear from Mia's parents, and I didn't expect to. The black envelope was not an invitation to a conversation. It was a delivery of information, a final statement of fact that required no response. The truth, once revealed, often works in silence. About 2 weeks later, I saw the true result. It came once again through the detached window of social media. Mia changed her profile picture to one of her and her friends, her arm defiantly in the air, a wide smile on her face. Her relationship status, which had proudly read engaged to Caleb last name, now read simply single. All photos of her and Caleb were gone, scrubbed clean from her timeline. Caleb's page, in contrast, became a wasteland of vague, angry song lyrics and cryptic posts about betrayal and snakes in the grass. My mother and father's profiles went dormant. The cheerful family photos and proud updates stopped. Their digital world had gone as quiet as my phone. The first few months of this new reality were a strange mix of relief and profound loneliness. My world had shrunk, but it was also more stable. There were no surprise $500 dinner bills, no panicked phone calls about financial emergencies. My money was my own. My time was my own. My peace was my own. But the cost was a family-shaped hole in my life. Holidays were the hardest. I spent Thanksgiving with friends, who welcomed me with open arms, but I couldn't help but feel a phantom limb-like pain for the loud, chaotic, dysfunctional family dinners I had once dreaded. At Christmas, exactly 1 year after the announcement that had started it all, I sat in my quiet apartment, decorated with a small, elegant tree that was all my own, and felt a wave of sorrow so deep it took my breath away. But as I sat there, sipping hot chocolate and watching the snow fall outside my window, I realized something important. The grief I felt was for a fantasy, for the family I wished I had, not the one I actually did. The family I had was one that saw me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a resource to be exploited. The silence I was now experiencing was not a punishment they were inflicting on me. It was the natural consequence of a resource that had run dry. They weren't calling because they missed me. They weren't calling because there was nothing left they could get from me. That realization was the final turning point. The sadness began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steady strength. I started to fill the hole in my life with things that brought me genuine joy. I traveled. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to do. I deepened my friendships. I started dating someone, a kind man who was impressed by my career not for what it could do for him, but for what it said about my character and my drive. My life became my own, built on my own terms, funded by my own hard work. It was a smaller life in some ways, but it was infinitely more authentic. The silence from my family continued, and I came to accept it. Perhaps one day a genuine apology might come. Perhaps it never will. But I am no longer waiting by the phone. They say you can't choose your family, and maybe that's true. But you can choose to stop being their safety net. You can choose to stop setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. I was forced to make a choice between their comfort and my self-respect. I chose myself. The question I leave you with is, what is the price of your peace, and are you willing to pay it?